Welcome to our session, everyone.
Okay, so shall I start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Shilpa here. I work for a Informix client software development kit and open source drivers development. Since from 3 years, I'm associated with the Informix team. So today's session is about what's new in Informix CSDK and open source drivers. So, okay. So next, first we will go through the agenda. So induction of a new features in Informix client software development kit. There are a couple of new features which we have introduced: native ODBC connection pooling support, and minimum pool size and maximum connection limit parameter support. And we provided a client level support in ODBC and SetNet 32 applications. And also we will discuss about development of open source drivers. So in the new features, we have added in Informix Python drivers, we have added new features. Those are smart triggers, standalone installation and connection pooling. For SQL Alchemy support, we have added a InformixAlchemy open source drivers. And for Node.js, we have added a node.informixdb driver support. So before going to the new features, I would like to give a brief intro about what is Informix Client Software Development Kit. So here Informix Client Software Development Kit is nothing but the bundle of APIs, that is application programming interfaces, where you can use these APIs and application developers will be enabled to use a multiple programming languages like a C, C++, Python, Java, etc. So mainly the Informix CSDK has these many APIs like a Odbc Api, ESQLC, Oledb Provider, and .NET Core Provider. So ODBC, as everyone knows that this is a open database connectivity. Using these applications, ODBC applications, you can directly connect and interact with the Informix database server. So next is ESQLC API, where it enables the application developers, they can develop their applications in C language, and they can embed SQL queries into their applications. So that will be enabled using ESQLC interface. So this is natively developed by Informix. Next is a Oledb Provider. So Oledb Provider is one where you can write your C, C++ or ADO applications. Here using C, C++ applications, you can directly interact with the Informix database using Oledb interface. And recently we have introduced a .NET Core Provider, where it will give a platform for building a web apps, IoTs, and mobile backends. And on top of this, on Informix CSDK, you can install the open source drivers so that you can write your applications using modern programming languages like a Python, Go, Rust, so on. So that comes on top of the Informix CSDK. So in general, you can say that CSDK will provide you multiple language support. So you can write your applications in whatever language you want. I mean to say supported language. So next we move ahead with the new features in Informix CSDK. First, we talk about a connection pooling support in ODBC driver. So this connection pooling support is enabled in Informix ODBC driver from 4.50 XE2 release onwards. So connection pooling is nothing but the cache of database connections, where the available connections, active or idle connections, are present in this connection loop. Any application want to connect to the server, it will just check in the connection loop, available connection loop. If it is a correct match is present, then it will use that connection and connect to the database server. So eventually it will help in getting a better performance. And we have APIs which will track the total number of connections like how many active connections are available, how many idle connections are available, or complete total number of connections are available. So here, no need to link with a driver manager library. You can directly use a Informix ODBC driver, and you can use the feature of connection pooling. So in a many applications like web browsing and all, where applications are very highly in OLTP nature, for them it will be useful, where it will optimize the connection resources. Okay, so here the main advantage of providing a connection pooling support is the applications can directly use Informix ODBC driver without driver manager. So that will be helpful, and that will improve your performance. And even all open source drivers, as all open source drivers are developed on Informix ODBC. So in this way, the all applications which uses open source drivers as well as a Informix ODBC driver, that will be helpful to improve the performance of the applications. So next we talk about now how the connection pooling will be enabled in a ODBC. So there are two ways to do this, like on a Unix or Linux machine. In a ODBC file, in ODBC section, you can add the you can set the connection pooling enablement. So there are a couple of parameters we have set, like Informix pooling, Informix CP timeout, and Informix CP match. So here to distinguish with the common terminology like a pooling, CP timeout, and CP match, we have appended with the Informix so that it is specific to Informix database. So here Informix pooling, first parameter where we set it as a 0 to disable and 1 to enable. For by default, this value will be set to 0. That means by default, the connection pooling will be disabled. You can enable by setting the value to 1. Next comes the timeout value. So timeout value is the one which decides after disconnect call how long my connection will be alive. So that will be decided by using this parameter Informix CP timeout value, whatever the timeout you have set. So the range of this parameter setting is like 5 to 60,000 seconds. So you can set in between the range from 5 to 6,000. By default value will be 60 seconds. If you set beyond the range, then it will be reset with a default value without showing any error or warning. And there is another parameter called Informix CP match, where we requested connection and available connection. So we compare these with some attributes. So if it is a 0, then it is a strict match where it will check for a 44 attribute values. And if it is a 1, that is a relaxed match where we compare a 13 attributes. So by default, the value will be 0. That means it is a strict match. And even you can enable connection pooling using APIs on Unix, Linux, or Windows platforms by calling SQL set environment attribute or SQL get environment attribute APIs. So like this, you can enable or disable the connection pooling from ODBC. So next we talk about, so now we have two options, like you can enable or disable in a ODBC INI file or API. So which will be having the higher precedence. Here API used in a program will be having a higher precedence than the ODBC.ini settings. For example, in a ODBC.ini file, if you disable the connection pooling, then the connection pooling is disabled from a odbc.ini setting. But from an application, by using this SQL set environment attribute function, you can enable the connection pooling by passing this connection pooling parameter like SQL INFX attribute connection pooling. By using this, you can enable. So it is always API will be the given the higher precedence. So this same thing applies for other parameters as well, for a timeout and a match parameters. So next we talk about, can I use both driver manager and driver connection pooling features together? So there is a no for this question, because application should use only one of the features. It can use either a driver manager or a driver connection or ODBC, Informix ODBC driver. If both driver manager and driver connection pooling is used in an application, then there is a no way for either driver manager or driver to know about the same. So the behavior will be unpredictable. So here next is will ODBC section in odbc.ini, whether it will conflict with the ODBC driver manager. So here no. So there will be a no conflict, because the whatever feature parameters we have added, that is very specific to Informix. And driver code uses the SQL get private profile string function to fetch the values for newly added parameters. So it is very specific to Informix. So there is a no conflict between a driver manager and driver. So next, now we have a connection pool enabled, and there are a couple of connections are present in the pool, and applications are using it. Once the disconnect function is called from the application, then it will check for the connection which is available in means which is connected to the application. That time it will decide. So depending on this Informix CP timeout, it will decide whether we can connect completely from the database, or it will kept it as an idle. So when you call a disconnect, that time if the CP timeout is expired, then it will disconnect completely. The connection will be disconnected completely. If the timeout is not expired yet, then that time ODBC code will be taken care that and this connection will be marked as an ideal, and the response to the client goes as a disconnection is successful, but internally the connection will be marked as an ideal. So once the timeout is expired, then that time the next disconnect call comes in. That time it will disconnect completely. So here, Informix CP timeout, as we discussed before, we have a range like 5 to 60,000 seconds. We can set in between 5 to 60,000 seconds. So next, we talk about what is the scope of connection pooling. So if ODBC INI file, in ODBC INI file, if you have enabled the connection pooling, then that will be applicable for all the applications which are using the ODBC. So whether it is enabled or disabled, that will be decided by odbc.ini file, and that will be applicable for all ODBC applications. And each ODBC environment, you can change it. Like if it is enabled in odbc.ini file, but in a single application, if you have two environments, then you can enable or disable using this API. So from a application API side, you can enable or disable the connection pooling according to the requirement of the application. Next, we talk about could we track the number of connections in applications using ODBC API? So yes, we can track the number of connections present in connection pooling by using the SQL get environment attribute function call. Here SQL get environment attribute, here you can pass the CP total connections, which will return you a total number of connections at any point of time, how many idle and active connections are present. So if you pass a CP total active, then it will show it will give you a count of how many numbers of connections are active. And CP total ideal, it will give you a ideal connections. It will return a connection count which are currently idle in state. And if connection pooling is disabled and you're you're calling these APIs, and it will by default it will return a value as a -1 as the connection pooling is disabled. So ideal connection means the connection is ideal, but actual physical connection is present to the database server. So next here I have added some screenshots of a running application. So here we are running a connection pooling application. Initially, the connection pooling is disabled. So here the total connection, it says -1 in a negative number. Active and idle connection will be -1, -1. Then later we enable the connection pooling, and we set the strict match, strict mode. Then we enable the timeout for a 10 seconds. So I have added a connection with a connection label connection string in. So once we connected, then it says the total connections are 1, and as it is connected, so active connection is 1 and idle is 0. So once you disconnect, the state of the connection will be switched, like active is 0 and idle is 1. Now I'm adding a so like that. If you connect or disconnect, you can see here the active and idle will be switching. Once you disconnect, the connection will go to idle. Once you connect it, it again comes back to active state. So then we add a second connection, which is labeled as a connection string in 1. So here you can see the total connections are 2 and active is 1 because one connection is connected and one is ideal. So it is ideal equal to 1. And if you connect the second connection also, then it will say active 2 and idle is 0. So like that. So here again I am adding a third connection with a connection string in 1. Here you can see that total connections are 3, active are 2 and idle is 1. So once you disconnect, so the active part will be decremented by 1 and idle will be incremented by 1. So it idle connections are 2 and active are 1. So total connections are 3 here. So once the operations are done, then you can disconnect it. And on a server side, here you can see by using the onstat -g command, here you can see that how many connections are available. While executing, you can see there are 3 connections are available. Once it is freed, you can see there are no connections are available. Okay. So next we go to the minimum pool size and maximum connection limit parameter support. This support is an extension of connection pooling, which is enabled on a 4.50 XE2. On top of that, we have enabled the maximum pool size and maximum connection limit support from a CSDK 4.50 XE4 version onwards. Here, the purpose of minimum pool size is to open as many number of connections during the first request of a connection. For example, if you set the minimum pool size value is 5, this will open total 5 connections when the first connection request is made. So in some cases, when new connection request comes in and it sees that in a connection pool there are no matching idle connections are available, and and some connections are expired due to the timeout expiry. In that case, it will open a minimum pool size number of connections again. So next we talk about maximum connection limit parameter support. Here, this will give a checkpoint where how many, at a given point of time, how many connections can be established from the application to database server. This will set the limit. So if you mention maximum connection limit equal to 20, then before opening any new connection, it will check this limit. If this value is already exceeded, then it will report an error. If it is not, then it will open the connections. So next, how do I enable these parameters in ODBC applications? There are a couple of ways to do this. On a Unix or Linux machine, in ODBC INI file under your DSN name, you can set minimum pool size and maximum connection limit values. And from applications, you can use the APIs like SQL set connection attribute, where you can pass the parameters for a connection pool size or a maximum connection limit. So from API, you always have to set these parameters before opening the connection. If you set these parameters after opening the connection, obviously it will report an error. And another way to do is using a connection string. In connection string itself, you can mention the minimum pool size and maximum connection limit. So in these three ways, you can enable connection minimum pool size and maximum connection limit parameters. So next is the client label support in ODBC driver. This support is enabled from a 4.50 XE4 version onwards. Here, the client label is mainly to track your application sessions or operations. So there are 5 ways to do that. The below sequence is in the decreasing order of a priority. In a ODBC connection string, here you can mention your label, like after your DSN. In a client label, you can mention the label as, here I am mentioning it as a my label. In SQL, using APIs like SQL connection attribute, here you can pass the parameter to set the client label, like attribute client label equal to my label. And even in a odbc.ini file for Linux and Unix machines, you can set the client label value in this odbc.ini file. And on environment variables, you can set these values using a export or set depending on the command prompt. And in a setnet32 application, you can open your setnet32 application. Here you can see that a client label, and here you can write, you can label your application and see the client label. And usually you can track these client labels in server side using onstat-g env command, so that you can track your client label. Using the client label, you can track your applications. Okay. So these are all about Informix new features, which were introduced in 4.50 XE4 and XE2 versions. Now we move ahead with open source drivers. Before starting with the new features in open source drivers, I would like to give a brief intro about Informix open source drivers, how it works and how it will interact with the applications. So as shown in this figure, you can see that on an Informix ODBC driver, you have to install the Informix open source drivers. And for example, if you want to write an application in a Python language, so for that you need to install a ifxpy open source drivers. So this will understand the Python language, Python programming language. So whenever application developer write its application in Python, this Informix Python driver will understand that, and it will send in such a way that the Informix ODBC will understand what is the request from the application. So that further will be interacted with the Informix server, and Informix server will sends a reply to the ODBC, and ODBC will send to the open source drivers. Then finally, the open source drivers will send back the reply to the application. So for any programming language, modern programming language, you can write your applications using open source drivers. For example, Python, Go, or Alchemy, SQL Alchemies, and Node.js drivers. So main open source driver application is like you can write the applications in any modern programming languages. So now we talk about the new features which we have introduced in the Informix Python driver. First, we talk about the smart trigger. As everyone know that smart trigger is one, when any changes happen in the table, it will send the notification. So these features are enabled in Informix Python driver from CSDK 4.50 XE4 onwards. To support this smart trigger feature, we have introduced 6 new features. Those are open smart trigger. Here to open the smart trigger session, get smart trigger session ID. Here you can get the session ID which is already open, and join smart trigger session. Here you can join the already opened smart trigger session, and you can register a smart trigger with a loop or a no loop, and you can delete the opened smart trigger session using a delete function. So all these functions are totally based on Informix ODBC driver smart trigger support. So next we talk about here we take an example how Informix Python driver works with a smart trigger. So here we have taken a simple example where it creates a two threads and register the callback function for a thread registered. These threads are registered, one for a table 1 and another for a table T2. In case of any event occurring which changes the data in respective table, the callback function will be invoked and prints these print me 1 and print me value. Here you can see that here we are importing the Informix Python drivers that import ifxpy, and remaining required libraries we are importing. In a connection string, here we are giving the all Informix database information like what server we are using, server name, database, and we are adding the credentials. All the details will be provided in a connection string. And using this ifxpy.connect function call, here you are connecting to the Informix database server. Once you connected, then you are opening a smart trigger session using ifxpy open smart trigger function call. Here function call, and you are creating a two threads where these threads we are calling this task, one for a table T1 and another for table T2. Here we are registering this smart trigger loop. Once any changes in this table occurs, it will send the notification, and it will call these functions print me 1 and print me 2, and prints the information whatever it gets from the Informix server. So like this you can use the smart trigger functionality in Informix Python driver. So another feature like standalone installation support we have provided in Informix Python. Before it was like you need to install a Informix client software development kit. That is a prerequisite thing. Then on top of that, you need to install a Informix Python driver. Now we have taken care in install script itself. Like in an Informix Python script, install script, it will take care what all the dependencies are required that will be automatically downloaded or installed in a particular location, so that there is a no need to install separate installation of CSDK is required. Here you can install a Python drivers using a pip install ifxpy, or a pip3, depending on the Python version you are using, like a pip2, Python 2 or a 3.x. And we have provided a support for a pip install for a Windows, Linux, ARM platforms for both Python 2.x and Python 3.x versions. And for all other platforms, you can use Informix open source source driver code, and you can do your local build, and you can use on a respective platform. So the driver code is a platform neutral, and the steps how to do a local build and all the information is present in an open GitHub link where you can go through the README file. There, the detailed steps, all the things are given there. And in Informix Python, we provide a connection pooling as well. We enable the connection pooling support as well. So next, we move ahead with the InformixAlchemy driver. The InformixAlchemy driver is a ORM which provides the ORM facility. So before going to InformixAlchemy, I would like to give a brief intro about SQL Alchemy. So SQL Alchemy is a Python SQL toolkit and ORM, Object Relational Mapper, that give you application developers the full power and flexibility of SQL. So SQL Alchemy is famous for its ORM properties, using which you can you can map the classes to the database, and which will internally create a table into the database. It is totally open source and cross-platform software released under a MIT license. Here in this picture, you can see that whenever you create an engine, you have to mention for which database you are creating and all the information about that. So this engine refers to the dialect and pool. Here, whenever you say a create engine, it will look for the dialect. Here, the Informix is our dialect, and depending on the local host and port number, it will select the connection from the pool, and it will establish the connection to DB API, and that further will be connected to the respective database. So here we are providing an Informix so that it will connect to the Informix database. So to enable this, we have developed the InformixAlchemy drivers. So next here we talk about InformixAlchemy drivers or adapters, you can say. On top of Informix ODBC, you can install a Informix Python driver. This is a prerequisite. We need to install the Informix Python driver. Then on top of that, you can install a InformixAlchemy, and you can use the ORM properties of a SQL Alchemy. Here you can we have enabled the features like a declare a mapping, create a schema, create an instance of a mapped classes, create a session, adding and uploading of objects, or you can say adding or deleting any rows. You can do that. You can do a rolling back, and you can fetch the data by querying the table. So all these features are enabled in Informix Alchemy drivers. We provide a support on both Windows and Linux platforms for now. And here, as I said, the prerequisite is Informix Python should be installed to use the Informix Alchemy. You can clone the repo from the Git link, GitHub link, and you go to the Informix Alchemy directory. Using a setup.py script, you can build and install the Informix Alchemy on your local machine. Here, the Informix Alchemy version is 1.0.1, and we provide a support for both Python 2.x and 3.x version. The latest Informix Alchemy is tested on a Python 3.9.6 with a SQL Alchemy of 1.4.23 versions. So here is an example, a screenshot of a running application. So here you can see that we are importing some libraries from a SQL Alchemy, like a create engine and registry. In a registry, we are registering our InformixAlchemy drivers. And in a create engine, using this connection string, we are creating an engine for the Informix database. The connection string will give all the information like server, what database you are going to use, where is the server present, and credentials. All those details will be present in connection string. So using that, you are able to create the engine. Now you are creating the class, and here by using a table name like a students, you are creating a table students with a column like a ID file, first name and last name. So whenever you map this class, uh, then internally it will create a table into your database. So whenever you call this metadata create all of engine, that time the data, so this student table will be created in a Informix database server. And once you create this mapped class, then you can create an instant by using this session maker, and you can configure, then it will create one session. Here you can insert a new rows into it by using session add. You can add a single row, or you can add a multiple rows using add all, and you can commit it. Once you fetch the data using session.query, you can see all the rows present in that table. And you can add a new row or update the existing rows in the table using this SQL query, session query. And there is another option feature we have enabled, like a rolling back. So rolling back is the one where you have lastly modified data will be rolled back. Like if you have added the new row, like a fake student, then if you call a rollback after that, then you commit, then this fake student entry will be deleted from the table. Later you can query the same table, and you can see the information about the table, what all the content it has. So basically all the features enabled, and you can access the SQL Alchemy. So next we talk about Informix Node.js drivers. That is a Node.js InformixDB. Here in a same way as other drivers are present, like same way the Node.js drivers also works. These are the high performance driver with a asynchronous or synchronous interface, suitable for highly scalable enterprise applications, and these are lightweight enough for IoT solutions working with Informix database. So this is the Informix on a Informix Odbc driver. You need to install this Node.js InformixDB. Then you can write your applications using Node.js. So currently we provide a support from 10.x to 14.x versions, and latest Informix DB Node.js drivers are tested on 14.17.5 version. And these drivers also provide a support for standalone installations, and we support for Windows and Linux platforms. You can install Node.js drivers using npm install InformixDB command. Latest version of InformixDB version is 2.2.1. And here we have provided support for connection pooling is enabled, and drop and create database. Here these features are enabled: connection pooling, drop and create database, and pre-compiled binaries are available for all the versions we support, like for version 10.x to 14.x. Here is in a small example where how we connect to the InformixDB driver in Node.js drivers, and how to open the connections by using the connection string. And you can query whatever is required, like you can insert or select. All these queries you can be running, and you can close the connection. So all the detailed information, like how to use all the open source drivers, and how to use the drivers, how you can compile that into your local build, or you can use pre-compiled binaries. And there are some sample examples also present in the open GitHub link. You can refer that. And here I have added references for open source drivers as well as CSDK new features. Here all the details and with an example are given. You can refer this. So thank you everyone. So if any questions, we can take up that.
There is one question in the chat. If you could open up the chat window, you'll see it there.
Okay. Among open source database. Okay, okay.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I can find it.
It's a great question. It may, it's more of a feature request.
Okay. Okay, so there is he's asking that client SDK is a obstacle for installing. So can you elaborate more on this question? Yeah, I can say that you can install there are a pre-compiled binaries, so you can use directly that. If you don't want to go through all the things, then for a Node.js we have provided pre-compiled binaries. You can use that.
Are there any other questions out there? Well, this was an excellent talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And yes, I agree with the clapping hands. That is a very good emoji for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, I will end the session and the recording. I appreciate everybody coming today, and we'll see you over the next few days at the rest of the conference. Again, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.